I found a lipstick that wasn't mine in my husband's car, so I tracked down the intern. You don't have to pull these little stunts. Take it back. That same night, Ethan came to find me. It was pouring rain that night. I gave her a ride home. That's all. She's easily scared. Don't go intimidating her. I nodded and handed him the signed divorce papers. I didn't threaten her. I just told her to wait a little longer. Ethan frowned. Are you being serious? Yes, dead serious. Ethan's grip tightened on the divorce papers, his face darkening. You want a divorce just because I gave her a ride and she accidentally left a lipstick in my car. I stared at him blankly, not answering right away. Ethan snapped impatiently. Say something. I couldn't understand why he was angry. Anyone watching would have thought I was the one in the wrong. If it really was as simple as he claimed, how could I, who loved him so deeply, ever bring myself to divorce him? I'd built this company from nothing right alongside him. From his days of scraping by to now being CEO Hayes, I was the one who deserved everything he had, wasn't I? I couldn't pinpoint exactly when Ethan had changed. At dinner, he no longer talked to me. Instead, he'd stare at his phone, smiling softly at whoever was on the other end. He started working late constantly. He'd always wait until I fell asleep, then sleep in the study, claiming he didn't want to disturb me when I brought up having a baby. He was always dismissive, either rushing through it or saying he was too tired. Wasn't that exactly what happens when a man falls for someone else? He saves himself for her instead. That's right. I don't put up with even the smallest speck of dirt. Either fire her and make her leave this city, or we're done. But how could Ethan bear to do that? At my words, the anger in his eyes flared hotter, and his voice turned ice cold. I never knew you were such a jealous woman. I suppose I spoiled you too much. I laughed, feeling my eyes prickle with tears. Her, or a divorce. Your choice. Ethan stormed off, furious. Over his shoulder, he said, You'd better think this through. Plenty of women would kill to be in your position. I felt nothing at his words. Being Mrs. Hayes wasn't nearly as glamorous as it looked. Endless banquets and dinner parties, forcing fake smiles while schmoozing with strangers. I'd earned a reputation for being able to hold my liquor back when we were building the business together. Everyone always wanted to toast with me. What they didn't know was that I'd earned that title at the cost of a stomach perforation. Drinking too much. Ethan's refusal to sign the divorce papers only made me think he was just bitter about splitting the assets. I didn't believe a man who'd fallen out of love still had any lingering affection for his old partner. If there was anything left, it was just guilt he was trying to ease. That same night, I moved out of the mansion we'd lived in since our marriage and into an apartment under my own name. I'd never liked big, empty spaces. I preferred curling up in a small, cozy nook. It made me feel safe. Ethan never agreed with that. To him, a bigger house meant higher status. But later on, he'd happily spend hours cooped up in that cramped, run-down apartment the intern rented, just to be with her. Ethan knew I'd moved out. Of course, he didn't try to stop me. Instead, he sent Secretary Parker over. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes asked me to pass along a message. You can be upset all you want, but you must attend the banquet the day after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow was Ethan's grandmother's 80th birthday, and he was throwing her a lavish celebration. Thinking about how the old woman had never liked me, I had zero interest in going. Still, I respected her. She'd raised Ethan all on her own after his parents died, and he adored her for it. Besides, we weren't divorced yet. If bad press tanked Hayes Corp's stock price, it would cut into my settlement. So even if Ethan hadn't sent a message, I would have shown up anyway. The moment I stepped into the grand hall, I saw Olivia Reid in an expensive gown, standing by the old woman's side and chatting warmly with her. I was surprised. No wonder Ethan valued her so much. His grandmother liked her too. Their expressions soured the second they saw me. The old woman looked outright disgusted, while Olivia wore a frightened, timid expression. I had no idea who she was putting on that act for. I'd only ever spoken one sentence to her. After all, Ethan, dressed in a tailored custom suit, walked up to me. His face was thunderous. Everyone else was already there. I was the last to arrive. Aren't you always the most punctual? Why are you late today? Grandma's furious. Go apologize to her first. I stared at Ethan, and a wave of exhaustion washed over me. apologize. Once, I would have. Now, not a chance. Back when I'd always arrived first, his grandmother would order me around the kitchen, saying she wanted to taste my cooking. But whenever I finished cooking, she wouldn't take a single bite. Ethan had tried to stand up for me back then, when his grandmother refused to eat. He'd eat the food instead, but after just one bite from him, the old woman would immediately order the servants to take the rest away and feed it to the dogs. There was a reason she disliked me. The Hayes family had been wealthy once. Before they went bankrupt, Ethan had made something of himself, but he'd disappointed her by marrying me, an orphan with nothing to my name. The old woman had always wanted a match of equal status, and from what I'd heard, Olivia's family was quite wealthy. She claimed she'd told her family not to help her, that she wanted to make it on her own to gain real-world experience. That kind of virtue probably made the old woman like her even more. I handed my gift to the maid standing beside the old woman and smiled. Grandma, your granddaughter-in-law wishes you boundless fortune and a long, healthy life. I have other matters to attend to, so I'll be going now. I turned to leave, but the old woman's booming voice stopped me. Hold it right there. Ignoring Ethan's furious expression, I turned back and smiled at her. Yes, Grandma, is something wrong? My attitude made her chest heave with rage. She kept muttering about how disrespectful I was, how everything had gone backwards. Just then, Olivia rushed over, her voice earnest as she spoke to me. Charlotte, please, get on your knees and apologize to Mrs. Hayes. Don't defy her like this. If something happens to her, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I frowned. Honestly, I had no idea when Olivia and I had gotten close enough for her to talk to me like this. Charlotte. She was calling me by my first name. Who did she think she was? Who do you think you are? Anyone watching would think you're Mrs. Hayes. You don't get to call me by my first name. My voice was loud enough for everyone around us to hear. Shock rippled through the crowd. No one had expected me to air the dirty laundry out in the open like that. Olivia's face went instantly pale. At my bluntness, murmurs spread through the onlookers. Her eyes welled up as she looked at Ethan. Then she covered her face and ran out. I felt a surge of satisfaction. The old woman was so furious she lifted her cane to strike me, but Ethan caught it mid-swing. Grandma, I'll deal with her properly. Please, calm down. Secretary Parker quickly tried to liven the mood back up, but I knew I'd already ruined the birthday banquet. Ethan dragged me away into the empty courtyard. He stared at me, his eyes completely cold. His voice was flat as he said, "Do you have to make a scene everywhere you go?" I let out a small laugh. Make a scene? You mean calling out your mistress? Had he even considered how I'd feel when he brought Olivia here today? There's nothing between us. Grandma likes her, so I asked her to come keep the old lady company today. Can you just stop this, Charlotte? Ethan rubbed his brow wearily, trying to get me to back down, like he always did. Back when he was exhausted from closing deals and looked like this, my heart would ache for him. It was the perfect excuse. 2. He wanted me to look like the one at fault. Fine, I'd just be even firmer. Divorce, or her, choose. When I didn't back down, Ethan pressed his lips into a thin line, rage glinting in his eyes. I'll send her away. Honestly, hearing him agree to send Olivia away didn't make me happy at all. Was this what it felt like to be completely and utterly disappointed? Ethan didn't know it yet, but this divorce was happening no matter what, and he'd never actually cut things off with her, because just a few days later, the paparazzi caught Ethan holding hands with a mystery woman. It was Olivia. Of course, the nail technicians exchanged glances, hesitant to say anything. I just smiled. It's fine. This is the last time I'll be getting my nails done as Mrs. Hayes. Anyway, I was tired. If Ethan refused to divorce me and tried to keep me tied down, he couldn't blame me for going straight to Olivia. But before I could make a move, Olivia came to provoke me first. She put on a wronged, pitiful expression as she explained herself. Charlotte, the media just makes things up. Mr. Hayes and I have a purely professional relationship. Nothing inappropriate happened at all. He just walked me home because he was worried about a young girl being out late alone. Charlotte, everyone else can doubt him, but you have to believe him. He's been so stressed about this new project lately. You need to stand by him, be his rock. Smack. Before she could finish, I'd slapped her hard across the face. I knew exactly what she was doing. She'd come here on purpose to explain, hoping I'd lose my temper and do something to her. Fine. I'd give her exactly what she wanted right where Ethan could see. Charlotte. Ethan, who'd just gotten out of his car, looked furious. He yanked me away from her roughly. I stumbled, barely catching my balance. At the same time, I heard the click of a camera shutter in the distance. I smirked when Ethan spotted the paparazzi hiding in the distance. He stared at me in disbelief. You called them here to take pictures? I looked him dead in the eye. Sign the divorce papers and give me what I'm owed, or tomorrow's headline will be about how you attacked your wife to defend your mistress. Hayes Corp stock will tank. Ethan, don't you forget I built this company from the ground up right beside you, and I know exactly how much you care about your reputation. He stood there silently, glowering at me with dark, cold eyes. He asked, Charlotte, are you really willing to throw all of this away? I wasn't willing. Not really, but I'd had enough of watching him love someone else. I wanted to leave with the last of my dignity intact, and live my life on my own. It wasn't too late, I told myself. I didn't want to turn into some bitter, jealous shrew. Ethan, you're the one who broke your promise to me. Ethan was silent for a long time. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. I smiled, a huge weight lifting off my shoulders. That same night, Ethan slept with Olivia. How did I know? Because she never missed a chance to rub it in my face. The sight of Ethan's relaxed, sleeping face stung. I knew it. He'd finally let go of all his guilt. Our financial ties were deeply tangled, so the divorce settlement wasn't going to be finalized quickly. I packed my bags and traveled abroad. Standing on a street corner listening to a violinist play, I thought back to the early days of our relationship, back in our tiny rental apartment. Ethan had fanned me while sweating through his shirt in the heat. Baby, I swear I'll never let you go hungry or suffer ever again, and I'll make sure Grandma never has to collect bottles for money again. The old woman didn't have to sneak out to collect bottles anymore, but I'd become his discarded wife. But I was only 32. After 2 months of travelin', my lawyer contacted me to say the settlement papers were ready. Ethan hadn't reached out once during all that time. I got it. Things were still new and sweet with Olivia. I sold all the properties and the 2 luxury cars I'd been awarded. With everything added up, $1 billion landed in my bank account. The day Ethan signed the papers, he couldn't resist sneering at me. All this for $1 billion. Charlotte, have some self-respect. I didn't care what he said. $1 billion was more than someone with simple tastes like me could spend in a dozen lifetimes. Before I left, Ethan added, Olivia's pregnant. You'd better stay away from her. My heart skipped a beat as I watched his back walk away. Ethan didn't know that I was also 2 months pregnant. I hadn't planned on keeping it, so I'd never mentioned it. A sudden irritation washed over me. Why did there have to be a mandatory 1-month divorce waiting period? I didn't want to wait another second, and I'd never regret this. One day, I was getting ready to go to the hospital for an abortion, but I'd noticed Olivia always seemed to know exactly where I was. I figured it was that all-knowing Secretary Parker who kept feeding her my location. Charlotte, I heard you and Mr. Hayes got divorced. I came to see how you're holding up. Charlotte, you really aren't very smart. If I were you, I never would have divorced him, have his heir, and the entire Hayes Corp would be yours to control. Right, I wasn't as cunning as Olivia. I was actually about to terminate this Hayes heir growing inside me. People with too much time on their hands get senile when they're old. Tell you what, Charlotte, if you wait on me hand and foot, make sure I eat well and stay comfortable. Then when my baby with Mr. Hayes is born, you can help take care of it personally. I'll talk to Mr. Hayes and have him set aside a room for you in our wedding house. How does that sound? Olivia said all this with a smug, triumphant smile. I stared at her coldly and let out a bitter laugh. I'm a billionaire. You think you could afford to hire me? I heard your family got lucky and won a $10 million lottery. But you told the old lady your family owns a listed company. If she finds out the truth, she'll skin you alive. People are what they are. If I were as shameless as you, you'd never get to pop out the Hayes heir. Now get out of my way. Seeing a monster like you first thing in the morning is making me sick. Thinking about my scheduled abortion and how long I'd been waiting for the elevator, I had zero patience for Olivia. I turned to take the stairs instead, but Olivia, her face bright red from my insults, chased after me and grabbed my arm to stop me. Charlotte, you haven't said yes to my offer yet. You can't leave. Then something straight out of a drama happened. In the tussle, we both lost our balance and tumbled down the stairs. As I watched blood pour down my legs, I had only one thought before I blacked out. Well, that's one way to skip the surgery. And by some cruel coincidence, Olivia had also miscarried. When I woke up, Ethan was sitting in the hospital room, his face dark as thunder. He sat half in shadow, looking like he'd come to make me pay with my life. His voice was so cold it made me shiver. Why can't you just let me be happy? I had no idea you were this jealous. I never should have told you Olivia was pregnant. Charlotte, having a child of my own is all I've ever wanted in life, and you destroyed that for me. Olivia lost the baby. Are you happy now? I stared at this man, pale and weak, unable to believe he could blame me so recklessly without knowing the truth. All he'd ever wanted was a child with her. Then what was my baby? Nothing. I finally broke down in tears, but even then, I couldn't stop myself from laughing bitterly. That's right. I'm jealous. I'm bitter. I wanted her dead. Ethan lunged at me, his rage boiling over, and wrapped his hands around my throat. And he said the words I would never, ever forgive him for. I wish you died instead. Don't act all innocent with me. I know you had a miscarriage too. He ground his teeth, his eyes blazing with pure hatred. You were abroad traveling for 2 months. Who knows who the father really was? Something inside me snapped completely. I grabbed the glass of water beside me and hurled it at him. Blood immediately seeped from his forehead. He let go of me and stared at me with cold, dead eyes. Get out. I never want to see you again. I never saw Ethan again after that. Only Secretary Parker handled all the arrangements for me. The day I was discharged, I said to Secretary Parker, "Stop giving out my location to people. I could sue you for this. I'm sorry. MRS.MS. Bennett, it won't happen again. Now that you and Mr. Hayes are divorced, I have no reason to pass your whereabouts on to Ms. Reed unconditionally giving Olivia whatever she wanted. Ethan really did treasure her, didn't he? I moved to a different city and opened a flower shop, spending every day surrounded by fresh flowers and greenery. My mood slowly started to heal, but in the middle of the night, when I woke from dreams, I'd relive that moment over and over. Clear as day, the hatred in his eyes. I still couldn't understand how love could turn into this. In the end, I heard Ethan and Olivia had gotten engaged, with the wedding set for a month later. How did I find out? It had been trending for days. As for me, his ex-wife, there were only a few brief, dismissive lines. The couple had grown apart and had been separated for some time before finalizing their divorce. Anyone with half a brain could tell Ethan had paid for that narrative. Now that he was wealthy, he cared more than anything about protecting his public image. He'd never let himself be painted as a complete heartless bastard. I heard Olivia was pregnant again. I hadn't realized Ethan was quite so virile. Whatever. None of it had anything to do with me anymore. Right before closing time, someone pushed open the shop door. I looked up. It was Secretary Parker. Ms. Bennett. Long time no see. I frowned, seeing that all-knowing Secretary Parker never put me in a good mood. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the Rolls-Royce parked outside. Ethan and Olivia were sitting in the back seat. Mr. Hayes is getting married next month. Ms. Reed would like to order flowers from your shop. Would that be possible? Possible. Secretary Parker pressed his lips together. Would it be possible for you to close the shop for a few days to focus solely on creating the wedding bouquets? I shook my head. No. It wouldn't. Tell her to order from somewhere else. Secretary Parker nodded and turned to leave. I sighed internally. Sometimes, the more you want to be left alone, the more people insist on bothering you. Like now, they still found a way to drag me into their lives, making your ex-wife arrange the flowers for your wedding. Who even comes up with something like that? A moment later, Ethan and Olivia walked into the shop. Ethan stared at me without saying a word. Olivia was the first to speak. Charlotte, only a fool turns down money. You might be his cast-off ex, but there's no point in being petty about cash. Right. Sorry. But I don't need that kind of money. As I spoke, I looked directly at Ethan, my eyes full of scorn. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, his deep voice laced with annoyance. Name your price. Charlotte. I smirked coldly. $1 billion. Non-negotiable. Olivia glared at me. Charlotte, we're trying to do business with you in good faith. Give us a real price. My husband's money doesn't grow on trees. I don't need your business. If you won't agree, get out. You're making me late for closing. Everyone knew the flower shop was just a hobby for me. Olivia just wanted to gloat. To show off that she'd won against me, but only she could see a man as rotten as Ethan as some kind of prize. My $1 billion price tag sent Olivia into a screaming tirade. Ethan just stood there, his face dark with anger. When they realized I wasn't going to budge, they left in a huff. I curled my lip in disdain, locked up the shop, and went out for my favorite hot pot. I thought that would be the end of it. But then Ethan's grandmother showed up at my door. The entourage she arrived with was so grand, you'd think some major tycoon was coming to visit. Charlotte, I'm here to make you respect the newlyweds' wishes and arrange the flowers for their wedding. I set down my nail clipper and glanced at her. And who do you think you are? The old woman nearly choked on her own rage at my words. She couldn't believe how I'd changed, how the woman who'd once jumped to obey her every command now talked back like this. What's gotten into you? Look who you're talking to. When Ethan wanted to marry you, I was the first to say no. But he wouldn't listen. Look at you, no grace at all. With that nasty, aggressive temper, you were never fit to be Mrs. Hayes. I rolled my eyes right then and there. If it weren't for my nasty, aggressive temper, Ethan's business would never have taken off. I was the one who marched into deadbeat clients' offices and got them to pay what they owed. I was the one who talked circles around his rivals at banquets, protecting his reputation and his crumbling business deals. I was the one who, that's right, it had all been me. What right did they have to say I wasn't good enough now? I'd had enough. I grabbed a broom and chased her and her entire entourage out of my shop. The old woman stumbled backward, nearly falling over. Furious, the whole group got back in their cars and drove off. But I felt lighter than air. That night, Ethan drove to my shop alone. His face was blank. He just stood there, staring at me silently. I didn't even look up. If you're not buying anything, get out. Wrap up 999 roses. I'm giving them to my wife. My hands stilled for a second. Then I looked up and smiled. $10 million. No haggling. The moment the payment notification pinged, I dragged the pre-wrapped $9.99 rose bouquet out from the storage room. Here you go. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Ethan pressed his lips into a tight line, then said what he'd really come for. You shouldn't have spoken to Grandma like that. I slammed my scissors down on the counter. Who are you? Who is your grandmother? What gives you the right to say that to me? I don't owe respect to someone who's old but doesn't act with dignity. Ethan, I'm only just realizing how much better my life is since I divorced you. I'm so glad I don't have to wait on your grandmother anymore. All of you make me sick. Take your flowers for your Mr. Sternwife and get out of my shop. If you show up here again, I'll spill every dirty detail about your little affair to the press, and that won't be something you can buy off for $1 billion. Ethan never came back. I knew he wouldn't. He cared too much about his reputation. Ethan and Olivia's wedding was lavish. Word was they spent hundreds of millions on it. The old woman couldn't stop smiling. She held Olivia's mother's hand and chattered away warmly. It was a world away from the scowl she'd worn at my wedding to Ethan, night and day. How did I know all this? It was broadcast on TV. I laughed coldly. It was all so ironic. Word was Olivia had stuffed all her relatives into positions at Ethan's company. How did I find out? I ran into the former finance manager on the street one day, and he poured his heart out about how miserable things had gotten. Olivia was in charge of the company's finances now, and she was brutally stingy with every employee who wasn't related to her. It made me think back to an old classmate of mine. He was brilliant, but he'd quit after being pushed out by office politics. Back then, I'd wanted to help him. I'd mentioned it to Ethan, asked if he could give my classmate a job. And what had he said? We don't have a shortage of talent here. Not just anybody can walk in and get a job. He wouldn't even do me that one small favor, let alone let me anywhere near the company finances. I should have let it go, I guess, because sometimes life just works out that way. It's full of unfairness that makes you question everything. I stopped paying attention to their lives and focused on my own. But it wasn't long before Ethan hit his first crisis. His brother-in-law got sued by his workers for failing to pay their wages. It was a huge scandal. The investigation revealed the brother-in-law had gambled all the payroll money away. Ethan flew into a rage. Olivia got on her knees in front of him, pregnant belly and all, begging for mercy. He softened up and bailed his brother-in-law out. When I heard about it, I just smiled. Business was picking up at the flower shop, so I hired 2 deaf girls and expanded the space. I learned sign language and started doing charity work. I went out to remote rural areas to fund roads and build schools. I kept myself busy. And I was happy. When I came back to the city, half a year had passed. Clara signed to me that for the past 6 months, a man had been coming into the shop regularly, always buying 999 roses for his wife. I tugged at the corner of my mouth. The man just wouldn't leave me alone. Later I found out Ethan hadn't had an easy 6 months either. Right after he fixed his brother-in-law's mess, his father-in-law caused another one. Word was his father-in-law couldn't stand being ordinary. He was convinced he could be a great entrepreneur. So he started investing in everything he could find, and the money for those investments. Naturally, Olivia had siphoned it from the company finances behind Ethan's back. By the time Ethan found out, 6 months later, the old man had blown through $500 million. So he had no choice but to take his father-in-law under his wing and teach him how to do business properly. The first step was business banquets, of course, but the man had no humility. Drunk, he'd boast to potential partners about how great he was, calling everyone else amateurs. The deal fell through, and the company announced they'd never work with Hayes Corp again. Ethan blew up at Olivia over it, but when he saw how close she was to giving birth, his resolve crumbled. He waved it off and said to forget about it. I couldn't help but marvel. Ethan really did love Olivia, didn't he? After I got back, I started planning to open grocery stores in underserved areas. Some people said they wouldn't be profitable, but I didn't care. I had money to burn. I'd worry about running out when it happened. But the stores were a hit. They had a wide selection, fresh produce every day, and low prices. Every now and then, I'd bring specialty goods from Arden City to give away as free gifts. They'd actually built up quite a reputation. Seeing the smiles on the elderly residents' faces when they got to eat cheap, fresh food filled my heart with a quiet satisfaction. But for every person climbing upward, there's someone sliding down. Olivia gave birth to her baby, but the child was born with intellectual disabilities. Ethan was stunned. There had been no history of intellectual disability in his family for 3 generations. So he had Secretary Parker look into Olivia's family. It turned out her grandmother had been born with intellectual disability. Yes, as had one of her paternal uncles and her cousin. And now, Olivia's child. The old woman cried until she was hysterical, then passed out cold. She'd already resented Olivia for her brother's scandals. Now, with her grandson born like this, she hated Olivia completely. She demanded Ethan divorce her. Ethan hadn't dared tell his grandmother about Olivia's father's messes. She'd have spit blood if she knew. Regret began to gnaw at him. He found himself thinking of his ex-wife, Charlotte, that sharp, strong woman who'd still carried herself with such grace and poise. Once, he'd thought Charlotte was too much trouble. Now he realized she'd been the easiest, most reliable thing in his life. Later, he'd looked into the date of Charlotte's miscarriage. He was almost certain the baby had been his. That made it even harder for him to face her. He wondered how she was doing now. I had no idea any of this was going through Ethan's mind. Even if I had, I'd have known he'd never admit he was wrong, not with how much he cared about his reputation. He'd just grit his teeth and keep going. Because of the baby's condition, Ethan didn't dare have another child with Olivia. He told Olivia to raise the child on her own, and to keep the baby away from his grandmother as much as possible. Olivia agreed outwardly, but in her heart, she knew this was the Hayes family heir. If she and Ethan never had another child, this baby would be the sole heir to the Hayes fortune. No matter how sad or unwilling the old woman was, she'd soften up eventually. Besides, she could already feel Ethan pulling away from her. She couldn't let that happen. She brought the baby to the old woman's house and threw herself into a dramatic sobbing fit. When the old woman saw her disabled grandson, she trembled with rage, unable to speak. Coincidentally, Olivia's father had found out she was visiting the mansion that day. He'd come along, hoping the old woman would talk some sense into his daughter. Ever since his investment failures lost them hundreds of millions, his daughter had refused to give him any more money. But no sooner had he brought it up than the old woman's eyes went wide. She'd suffered a brain hemorrhage from the shock and was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. The news that Mrs. Hayes had been left paralyzed reached me right as I returned to Arden City. I was surprised. That was all. When she'd come to my shop to pick a fight, she'd been rosy-cheeked and full of fire. It had only been 2 years. How had she ended up paralyzed? I didn't dwell on it. The grocery stores were doing so well I was expanding. I hired local people who couldn't find work elsewhere. I gave Tom a man with intellectual disabilities who'd grown up relying on the kindness of the Villa Hay a job cleaning the store entrance. He even lived in the back room. He'd clapped his hands in pure joy when I offered him the job. He might have had intellectual disabilities, but he worked meticulously and kept everything spotless. I trusted all my employees completely. Every family in the village was grateful to me. The first Fortune Mart grocery store officially opened its doors. I stood front and center for the group photo. A grocery store in a small count. Why wasn't going to make headlines? But I put my heart into it, and it kept me busy. That was all that mattered to me now. After his grandmother's paralysis, Ethan and Olivia separated. He moved into one of his apartments alone and refused to see Olivia no matter how many times she came looking for him. With everything going wrong in his second marriage, he started to wonder, was this karma? But he quickly hardened his heart. No, it couldn't be karma. Charlotte had been the one dead set on divorce. He'd never wanted to leave her. Maybe she'd had a lover on the side, and that's why she'd been in such a hurry to end things. She'd been the one who betrayed him. I had no clue Ethan was thinking all of this. Let's just say what goes around comes around. And his comeuppance arrived sooner than he expected. One of the relatives Olivia had brought into the company, her paternal uncle, embezzled a massive sum of corporate funds and fled the country overnight. Tracking him down would be nearly impossible. When Ethan found out, he sat in his office all night. The ashtray was overflowing with cigarette butts by morning. His company's cash flow had completely dried up. Meanwhile, my grocery stores were thriving, and my other investments were paying off. I'd already doubled my $1 billion, and because of my ongoing charity work, I agreed to do a news interview. When Ethan saw me on TV, rosy, glowing, more beautiful than ever, finally felt the full weight of his regret. He went back to the mansion and found Olivia in her pajamas, hair a mess, worn ragged from taking care of the baby alone. Ethan asked for a divorce. Olivia refused. She flew into a hysterical fit, laughing and crying at the same time. In the end, she threatened to kill herself and the baby, and Ethan backed off for the time being. When I saw Ethan again, I was shocked by how he looked. It was a snowy day, and he was only wearing a thin sweater. He was gaunt and haggard from running around trying to raise money for his company. Ethan walked up to me, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice rough and hoarse. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. I regret everything. Please, come back to me." I slapped him hard across the face to shut him up. If I didn't stop him right then, I was going to throw up the delicious dinner I'd just eaten. 5 bright red finger marks bloomed on his pale face. His eyes were wide with shock. I immediately called Olivia. I was glad she'd kept popping up to provoke me all this time. That's how I still had her number. Olivia showed up with the baby, screaming and laughing hysterically on the sidewalk. She even tried to attack me, but Ethan stepped in the way. Her sharp nails raked deep scratches across Ethan's face. Disgusted by the whole scene, I got in my car and drove straight to the airport. I was far too busy for this nonsense. I didn't have time for those 2 lunatics. Ethan never came looking for me again. His company was on the brink of collapse, and he was drowning in crisis. He was completely overwhelmed trying to fix it. I knew why he'd had that breakdown that night. He'd been after my $1 billion, as if that billion was mine, and mine alone. He never did manage to divorce Olivia either. Her family was utterly shameless, and their demands for compensation were absurd. If Ethan wanted a divorce, they'd bleed him dry. He had no choice but to sell off assets to plug the holes in his company's finances. By the end, all he had left was the mansion and one car. It was barely enough to keep the company afloat. But before Ethan could even catch his breath, his father-in-law was arrested for stabbing a man to death in the street. And the man was unrepentant to the end. As they took him away, he yelled, "My son-in-law is Ethan Hayes, CEO of Hayes Corp. Just wait, he'll take care of all of you." That single sentence sent internet users digging into every corner of Ethan's life. The company, which had just started to recover, plunged back into crisis. At the same time, an old voice recording leaked from when he'd first started cheating with Olivia. Arrogant, cocky, full of himself. "Go ahead and cause all the trouble you want. I'll always clean up your messes." Olivia had sent the screen recording to her friends back then. Just to show off, internet users began to sympathize with me. The whole story of what had happened between Ethan and me came out into the open. Ethan and Olivia were torn apart by public opinion. Hayes Corp went bankrupt. All of Ethan and Olivia's assets were seized. They were left renting a tiny, run-down apartment with their child. Olivia followed Ethan everywhere, terrified he'd run back to me to try and fix things. But she couldn't handle the fall from grace either. One day, she snapped and started screaming at him, calling him a useless failure and worse. Ethan strangled her to death in their bed. The baby, too. As for Mrs. Hayes, her caregiver abused her every day. One day, she just quietly stopped breathing. Ethan was sentenced to death. When I heard the news, I could only sigh. "Ms. Bennett, we're ready for you." I smiled and nodded, then stepped forward for the interview. My grocery stores grew and flourished. I opened branches all across the country, never losing sight of why I'd started, and kept doing charity work every step of the way. My life just kept getting better and better. And those who betray true love, they always get exactly what they deserve. Hey there, could you rate this story in the comments? Use a scale of 1 to 10, please, I am begging you. It really means a lot to me. And if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit follow.